Good afternoon, Bruins. I say afternoon because I am actually on the UCLA campus today. For those of you who have not met yet, my name is Julie Sina, and I have what really is the joy of serving as your alumni director. And I cannot wait actually until you join me back on campus in Westwood at UCLA. We're seeing a little bit more activity now, but the campus still is officially closed, and it will really bring back to life when all of you return to be with us. And we look forward to being in person again. But as of today, I also really want to acknowledge and appreciate the opportunity to gather through technology on Zoom from wherever we are in the world and whatever time zone we're in. So thank you for that, and thank you for coming together. We've really enjoyed over this last year. We've spent time with alumni around the world just to find out, what this experience has been like, what going through a year in a pandemic has been like for them, where they live, in their pods, in their bubbles, and just to see what the experience is within their countries. And today, we actually have the opportunity to talk with alumni and students from South America, just to explore what this year has been like for them and for those that they love and care about. So I'd like to go ahead and get started and invite our panelists to join us. And while they are coming to life on the screen, one of the things I want to acknowledge also is we have three experts with us today, experts on their own experience. And while we may ask them a lot of questions about their country or their city, acknowledge that it's their perspective and their observation and their experience. So just want to put that out there as we get started today, and appreciate your willingness to spend time with us and also to share what this year has been like for you. And I know this hour we have together, I know it's going to go by really fast. So let's just jump right on in. So what I'd like to do is to invite each of you to introduce yourself, tell us your name, where you're from, and where you've been over this past year. And also, when you were at UCLA, for our alums, what you majored in, what your degree is, and for our students, what degree you're working toward. So Veronica, how about if we start with you?
Of course. Thank you so much, Julie. So yeah, my name is Veronica, and I'm from Colombia, from Bogota, Colombia, and I am currently a student at UCLA. I am majoring in English, and I have a minor in history and entrepreneurship.
Thank you so much. Welcome, Veronica. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. So Pietro, how about if you go next?
Sounds great. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Pietro. I was born in Brazil, but I'm actually from Argentina. And I currently major in business economics and minor in entrepreneurship. I'm a third year, but I'm actually graduating at the end of this calendar year. So I don't know if I should call myself a senior.
We'll call you a senior today. And what is it that you hope to do when you graduate?
Well, first of all, find a job. I plan on
putting that out there for our audience.
Exactly. I plan on staying in the US for a couple of years, eventually studying either an MBA or some other sort of graduate degree, and then eventually coming back home either to Argentina or Brazil.
Thank you. I know that UCLA degree will certainly hopefully get you where it is that you hope to be. Pedro, let's end with you in our introductions.
Sure. Thanks a lot. First, thank you everyone there for this event there. I think it is very interesting that we get together and talk to some people there. So I'm Pedro here. I'm Brazilian. Right now I am in Brazil. I'm from class of 2016, but a master's in computer science there at UCLA. A great time there. I really miss it. But right now I've been in Brazil also during the pandemic, and all this time I've been here.
And what are you doing, Pedro, for your day job?
I decided to go to the entrepreneurship route. So after I left UCLA, I founded a IoT company. So Internet of Things there related with industrial applications and all that. And I've been in that since then.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
So the first question I want to put out there is just in general, what has this year been like for you? When you think back to when you first heard that there was this pandemic and we needed to go into this lockdown kind of a situation, tell us a little bit about where you were and what the experience has been like for you in terms of the quarantine experience. Does anybody want to jump in?
Hey.
Go for it.
Yeah. For me, it was, I still remember like last year when it started, I think it was actually 2019 when I remember hearing the first news. And last year I was here with a family. Here, my family lives in the city, and I was taking, I think, my dad to the doctor, even just with my family there. And I remember seeing the news, like first case in Brazil. It was kind of like you don't imagine that things will actually escalate to a certain level. You see that things are starting to heat up, but I think it was in February. So then the cases started increasing and all. And well, it kind of stalled a little bit. Like the people stayed more in their homes. I think since March, we had some restrictions, some lockdowns and other things. And from there on, we're still observing these kind of things. Some lockdowns, some other restrictions. And
So were you ever in a complete lockdown in your city?
yes, we were. I think the first one was in March.
Mm-hmm.
So if I remember correctly, the first infected here in Brazil was in February. So in March, they decided to do the first lockdown, especially here in my city. So after a couple of months or some time there, they released that, but we're still with some restrictions. Then they decided to make wearing masks something that is supposed to do. And actually, last month we also had another lockdown here in my city.
So things had opened up and then they locked down again?
Yes, exactly. So it's been coming like back and forth.
Mm-hmm. And have you found that people are pretty much following the directions of the authorities?
It depends. I think especially before the previous lockdown, people are getting a little bit too relaxed. I feel like it. But it is a difficult situation to assess at the time that we are. I think we'll look at that in a couple of years, maybe in hindsight, and see which shows if we made the right decisions or not. So
yeah, I think that's definitely true.
Yeah, but some people were not really respecting it that much. Some others were respecting more scared. So I think we had it all over the place.
So how about our two students, Veronica? Tell us about how the experience started off for you and where you've been.
Sure. So around sometime in March, I work on campus, and I was.
So Veronica? You were on campus in March?
Yeah, we were on campus, and there was this sort of like looming threat, but nothing that was concrete yet. I know a couple universities had canceled classes, but UCLA hadn't said anything yet. And I was going to work, and I work at the same place where the chancellor works at. And
you work in Murphy Hall?
Yeah, I work at Murphy Hall. And that day where they decided to, close UCLA for the initial 2 weeks, everyone was kind of going crazy. And I remember texting my dad, who's back in Bogota, like, I think they're gonna shut down the school at least for 2 weeks. And my dad said, like, oh, that's great. You can come and, visit, and we haven't seen you in a while, so come for 2 weeks, and then we'll see like what's gonna happen. And I remember I actually went to class right after that, after the announcement had already been sent out to people, and our professor actually did not do class that day, and just told us, showed us a PowerPoint of the curve of the COVID curve, and told us, to stay home and to wash our hands. And
do you remember how did you feel when your professor did that presentation? You remember that?
Yeah, it was surreal, but at the same time, it just felt like, since UCLA, the thing was, they told us it was 2 weeks. So I 100% thought that, we were going to stay home for 2 weeks. In my case, I was going to go back to Colombia for 2 weeks, and then maybe be back in time to, start a life up again. So I guess there was this relaxed aspect to it. I think we all sort of like looked back in hindsight and thought we'd be back after 2 weeks. But yeah, it felt very, very strange. And then as soon as I got home to Colombia, I think there were 2 days, and then right in the third day of me being back home, there was a full quarantine mandate where very, very strict. You know, you could only leave your house for 20 minutes a day to walk your dog.
Mhm.
Um,
So
and
that
then
was when you were at home, you got that was the case.
yeah, I was at home. There was absolute restrictions on mobility, police on the streets.
So it was sounds like it was very strictly enforced.
Yeah. So when I would see my friends back home, back here in LA or in the United States, just kind of like going for walks, I was like, wow, that's that sounds cool. Because I was very much locked in my apartment with my mom and my brother and my dog. So yeah, it
And
was
so how long did you stay home for?
I stayed home until September.
Mm.
So I stayed home for a really long time, and it was most of it was in lockdown. The Colombian airport, international airport, was completely locked down until September. So there was no going in and no going out.
Mhm.
Um, and then from that point on, they've done uh, periods when it's open, and then they lock down, and periods when it's open and lock down. Um,
So did you come back to UCLA in September then?
I came to UCLA in September, and I will be back in Colombia in a few weeks. Yeah,
And are you living in an apartment off campus now?
I am. Yeah, I'm living in an apartment off campus with three of my roommates. But yeah, I'm missing home a lot, actually.
I bet. Well, and I know we'll come back to, because I know a lot of our listeners want to hear about what it's been like to be a student during this time. So we'll come back to you with that question. But for now, let's head over to Pietro and tell us about when you first learned about the pandemic and where you were and how this year has been.
I think the best word to characterize it is uncertain, because when I first received the news, I remember I was also on campus. We were studying end of winter quarter in week 9 or 10. I can't remember exactly which one. And then we started beginning or middle of March, and then we started getting the news that Corona was really big, and then a lot of cases were happening in Seattle, and they were starting in California. And me and my friends, we would always talk about it, and we all thought it was not something that big, right? Because we had never experienced anything similar to this. So we all thought it was just like Veronica said, a 2-week thing, and then after 2 weeks, we're all going to be back on campus, all back for spring quarter. But then I realized that things were really serious once I called my mom, and she was actually in Brazil. And she told me, look, I bought you a ticket and you're coming back. And I said, wait, why? Like, I don't want to come back, especially because we're international students and we never know what might happen, right? So I thought, no, I really want to stay here, because what if they don't let me in and classes are in person and then I miss a quarter and all of this happens? But she said, no, you're coming back because things are getting really bad. I have some friends in Asia who told me that things are locking down. So you got to come back. So I think it was March 16th, the day that I came back to Brazil. And that was actually the last flight to Brazil
Wow.
from LA to Brazil. So my mom was completely right. And then when I got back to Brazil, I said,
And let
okay,
me just say,
so
Pietro, moms enjoy hearing you say that they're exactly right.
they are. But when I got to Brazil, again, I felt it was all uncertain because I came back on a Sunday. On Monday, I had finals, and Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I had finals. But during my flight, I got an email saying that they were canceled. So I wasn't really sure what was happening. Just go back to Brazil. I was glad to be with my parents, but at the same time, I didn't want to come back because I felt like I could be a threat for them, right? They were all living in the same household. What if I got something on the plane and then went to live in their houses, and I was the one who brought this disease in the house? So I was feeling really bad and really uncertain about all of that. So when I got to Brazil, the first place I went to was a lab. I got the PCR test. I got tested,
Mhm.
and then I went on into my bedroom and quarantined myself from my family until the test results came. And luckily, I didn't have it. But then I stayed there in Brazil until December. And as Pedro said, there were a couple of lockdowns, and initially everyone was taking it really seriously, and we were all inside our houses. But one thing that many people here don't realize is that a lot of people in Brazil, they have to work day by day. They are dependent on that income. So really, if you're faced with a choice, you can either stay home and maybe not know what you're gonna eat for dinner, or you can risk yourself and try to get something that you can buy and eat for dinner, right? So this is something that's common in Brazil, and which is something that here in the US you don't really have to worry about it that much. In Brazil,
That's what I was going to ask you about, because I think here, as you both know, we're used to the DoorDash, the Uber Eats, and everything. So you take that for granted, right?
Exactly. And this stimulus package in Brazil was completely different. I know.
Tell us how so.
It was, I think it was $600 per month, or 600 reais per month, which translates to $120 per month. So really, what can you do with $120 if you have to live 30 days, maybe getting your kids dinner, lunch, breakfast, books if you study, or a computer if you study from home now. So really, like, the reality is completely different. So maybe that's a little bit of why people didn't respect the lockdown that much. But luckily, somehow cases in Brazil weren't that bad until the beginning of this year, when all the other variants got to Brazil. And now things are actually worse today than they used to be a year ago, which is impressive, right? If you think about it, and if you put into
Pedro was saying, you ended into a whole nother series of lockdowns. So
exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was me until December. I stayed in Brazil. In December, I decided to go to Argentina because I really wanted to come back to the US, especially because I'm graduating in December. I really felt like there's no point of me studying or going to UCLA, but studying from my apartment in Brazil. So I really wanted to be back. And then luckily I was able to come back in January, and this is where I've been since.
Getting ready to graduate.
Yeah, exactly.
So one question that's come in that I just want to throw out to everybody is, what's the vaccine roll-up been like in your countries? Pedro, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Right now, I think we have 15% of the population vaccinated with
15%?
15,
okay.
15% of the population vaccinated with the first phase of the vaccine. And we have 7% with a second shot. So we still have some ways to go there. Right now, we're vaccinating the age 60 and up. So until it reaches the younger population, might take a little while.
How about you for your family, Veronica?
Yeah, I think it's very similar. I'm not entirely sure the percentage, but I know right now they're vaccinating 60 and up as well. And it's been very slow. There is, vaccine inequity that I think all of the Latin American countries can probably relate to, and most countries that are not, the US or Europe. And so part of the reason why I stayed here for so long was because, my parents wanted me to get the vaccine here in the US to be able to, because UCLA was giving it out to every single one of their students. So yeah, it was important for me to get the vaccine here before traveling or anything like that. So yeah, it's been very slow. And right now in Colombia, we have one of the worst peaks of the whole pandemic as well. Thanks to, violence and there's some political unrest that is also part of it. So really it's really sad to see how vaccine inequity is affecting Latin American countries.
How's your family doing?
My family is okay right now. They're all quarantined, but yeah.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that's also come in, I'll throw this one to you, Pietro, to start, is that for both you and Veronica, you've experienced, both your country and being back, on campus in terms of how COVID's being handled. How would you compare your experience?
Could you ask that question again?
Yes.
Sorry.
How would you compare the experience of the pandemic from being in your country to being back in Westwood?
I think it's completely different. I think, especially when I was in Brazil at a point during, we were supposed to be in a lockdown and things. I lived in São Paulo there, which is like the biggest city. So you have a lot of people there and it really looked like everything was normal. Of course, some people were wearing masks, but there were still a lot of people on the streets. And I was really surprised by that. And when I first arrived here in January, it was hard to see people on the streets, even in Westwood, which is supposed to be a city or a place with a lot of people, a lot of college students. There was really not a lot of people. And I think that's due to many things, but I feel like in South America, people got a little bit tired of the lockdown earlier than they did here. Maybe because I really have no idea, honestly, but I feel like that's the impression I have.
So you feel like people got tired of the lockdown, Pedro?
Yeah, I'm not blaming anyone. Even I did get tired of the lockdown too, but I felt like people started going out sooner in South America.
Pedro, how about for you and your family?
Yeah, here everyone is fine, but I have some relatives that got even the intensive care and all that because of the COVID-19. So it has been challenging, and I see that sometimes it might be the effect of just, like Pietro said, of being tired of it and not caring that much, which brings some consequences. But it's hard to weigh things because some people really do depend on it. Some other people do not depend. It's just because they got tired, and there's like a herd effect. Since more people are doing something around you, you end up following that as well. So it is hard to weigh these effects since it happens such a big scale.
And how's your family doing?
They're fine here. They've been, we're fortunate enough that we can just be home. I can work from home as well. Since they started work from home, and most of my relatives as well. So.
Well, and speaking about working from home, we have some of our listeners that are really interested in hearing from our students about what it's been like to be doing UCLA remotely. So to either one of you, Veronica, how about if I ask you first to tell us a little bit about what your student experience has been like?
It's been very interesting. At the beginning when I was at home, it was hard to do everything because before, I would be on campus and I would be motivated by that sort of atmosphere. As I said before, I would go to work, so I would have this whole routine going. Whereas when I was home, and I feel like we can all relate to this, I would go from my room to the kitchen and from the kitchen to my room, and that was my routine. And so that was hard for sure. And then now coming back to Westwood and being here, I live with 3 other people. So for example, when one of us has an exam, like we all have to, tell each other in advance. And exams are, I don't know if people know this, but exams are monitored through video cameras sometimes. So you have to kind of like kick your roommates out of your room and ask them to be quiet and yeah, it's very interesting. What I do sometimes as well is I'll go to campus and I'll sit. There's some like designated chairs and places where you can sit. So I'll go and sit outside and kind of feel a little bit like I'm back in campus. But it's definitely sad because you don't see as many people as you did before.
Now, the follow-up question on your classes are they live? Are they recorded?
I mean, there's really everything. So there's classes that are online and that you have to be present. I have a few of those where there's seminars, especially in English classes and in entrepreneurship classes where you need to participate. So you must have your camera on. You have to, engage with the professor, with the topic, with your classmates. You participate in breakout rooms, things like that. And there's others that are asynchronous and recorded, so you just kind of do the work as you can. And that, I think that involves a lot more discipline than I have, because I don't think I'd be able to do that. and then yeah, there's really everything under the books. I know that professors have done a really good job, maybe not at first, but I think they've become very flexible, especially with time zones. Pietro and I are part of a group that advocates for international students, and we have, one of our things has been to advocate for flexible time zones for taking exams. So for example, when I have an exam, there's always another makeup date for students that cannot make the time zone, or for students who are, joining the class at 5 a.m. or things like that.
Mhm. Pietro, what about your experience as a student?
I feel like my experience with virtual learning can be described with a bell curve. So when spring hit last year, so that's when the pandemic started, and I was in Brazil, my parents had just moved to a really small apartment because I had left home and I didn't plan on coming back. So they left to this really small apartment, but all of a sudden it was me, my parents, and my brother all living under the same roof, and we're all working from home or studying from home. And it's just like what Veronica said. I would go from my room to the kitchen, to the dining room, back to my room. But the problem is that always in one of those places, either my brother, my mom, or my dad would be working. So it's just so much noise. And especially my mom worked at a bank, so she would always be on calls. And I don't know, Brazilians are a little bit loud, Argentinians too. And everyone is just screaming all the time. And then I'm trying to focus on my class. And as Veronica said, at the beginning, some professors, I don't think they quite understood what it was like to be in a place where you really don't have a routine. You cannot say, look, Dad, Mom, I need you to leave. I need you to be quiet and I'll take my test now. No, you can't say that. And
Well, how did you navigate that?
really, I had to, I struggled through that. At the beginning, it was pretty hard. I had just to lock myself in a room, just tell my parents an hour in advance, look, please be quiet. I have this test and it's really important for me. So just please be quiet. Try to be quiet. Don't even be quiet. Just try to be quiet. But at the beginning, it was really hard because I'm also in the entrepreneurship minor. And as Veronica said, there are many discussion-based classes. And it's hard to make that virtual, right? It's hard for you to record a discussion and then how are you going to participate in it? So really, some days I had to stay up until pretty late because there was a 5-hour time difference. And then I would be discussing, but at the same time, my parents would be sleeping in the room next door, so I couldn't be that loud. But so it was a little bit hard. But then during summer and fall quarter, that was when looking at the bell curve, that's like the peak, because I kind of learned how to manage my way through virtual classes. So I really could make my own schedule. I didn't have to stick to certain times. I could just take my classes on my own pace. I could just do my homework whenever I wanted. But then it went down again when I came back to Westwood, where life was becoming a little bit more normal. People were getting vaccinated. And now, really, as Veronica said, I'm living with 3 people as well. And we all have tests, we all have interviews, we all have meetings. And it sometimes just gets too crowded. And you're just sitting at your place. I look through my window and I see UCLA right here. And I just really miss the feeling of being in the classroom.
Well, I think Westwood has gotten a little lively over the last couple of months than perhaps.
Yes.
So each of you have been in family situations, Pedro, you're with your family, Pietro, you lived with your family, now your roommate, same thing for you, Veronica. So as you think about this last year and that question that I just asked Pietro about how you navigate that situation, particularly during the pandemic, what are some of those lessons learned about your individual group living situations over this past year, particularly with the challenges of not, in theory, not supposed to be going anywhere. So what kinds of things did you learn? How did you modulate as the year went on? Pedro, how about you and your family?
It's me or Pietro?
It's you.
Yeah, it's similar. The name there is.
Yes, I'll work on my pronunciation.
I think one of the changes that I've seen is that whoever was not used to really using technology that much or adapting to the world that was already on its way to being more digital, I think had to learn because the pandemic forced them to learn. So right now we're in this Zoom call here, which I think that is one of the things that we can say was one of the upsides of it, so that we allow some people to, like I'm here in Brazil, in Brasilia, really. It's not like the capital, it's not so famous. It's not like São Paulo, Rio, or something like that. But I'm able to talk to everyone, people like you in the US or some other places in the world. And people are more open to that. So I think that one was an interesting thing. And I think it was a challenge for a lot of people, but they were forced to do so.
No, I think you're right about the technology. I mean, I think we all, you know, very quickly learned how to communicate via Zoom or whatever tool that we use. And I have to say, there's not a day that goes by that I still don't have myself on mute when I'm supposed to be talking. I'm like, it's not my first Zoom. But I think as we think about, we have these conversations, and I'll get to some questions about UCLA also that have come in, is, you know, I think going forward, we're kind of going to be in this hybrid place because we've realized, you know, just the ease of being able to communicate. You know, we may talk about that Zoom fatigue, but at least we still have the space that we can be together. So how about your teachable moments from this last year of living with families or roommates? Veronica, anything that you can add?
Sure. I mean, I think what Pietro said before really encapsulated it. I think at the beginning, when I was living at home, it was very hard because it was almost like I was back for summer, but we all still had so much responsibilities. And there's this thing about Latin American families where it is very hard to explain to sometimes American families, but they like to eat breakfast together, lunch together, dinner together, which I love. But it's also very hard to explain to your professors that lunch is at 2 because mom says that lunch is at 2. And so that was a fun experience because sometimes I would have
How did that go for you? Can you give us did you actually have that conversation with the professor?
no, never. I had to have it with my mom.
Oh, you're with your mom. Got it.
Yeah.
How did that go with your mom?
Well, you know, it went. Yeah, but also I think
Pietro's smiling with you on that one.
yeah, it's a hard thing to manage, just being home and managing so many different schedules. But also what I was gonna add is that it was a very emotional period. Like I think we were all in my family going through different emotional things that were pandemic related. And so not only learning to deal with people's schedules, but also with people's emotions so close to you and so like there all the time. For example, a struggle that I faced was, and I think one of the questions in the chat I see that kind of relates to it, but we had a lot of, as international students, like immigration and visa struggles throughout the summer. And they were so stressful because one day you'd wake up and it was like, your visa's gonna get taken away, and the next day you'd wake up and it was like, now it's not gonna get taken away, but you can't come to the United States at all. And then, you know, it was this sort of like roller coaster of emotions, and I feel really bad that my mom and my brother had to sort of endure that from me.
Well, and all the while you're enduring a pandemic.
Right,
There's
exactly.
a health fear as well.
Yeah.
Pietro, I know you talked about some things, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do have something to add too. I feel like when I was complaining about my parents before, I wasn't quite fair to them. And I feel like it's something that was really good from the pandemic is that me, my parents, and my brother, we never expected me to go back and live with them, especially for a long period of time, as I did during the second half of last year. And that was really great, honestly. What Veronica said is completely true. With my family, we have breakfast together, especially if we're all working from home, have breakfast together, lunch together, and dinner together. And at the beginning, yes, I struggled with that because I had class at the same time they were having dinner and all of that. But then at the end, I started thinking, oh, I'm really gonna miss this. You know, I don't usually have the chance to have dinner and lunch with my parents every day, and I don't think I'll ever have the chance to do it unless we have another pandemic. Please, knock on wood. But
God, whatever.
Yeah. But really, I really appreciated those moments. The fact that on a Sunday I could just watch a movie with them on the living room. This was great. That was probably one of the best parts of my pandemic.
Do you both feel too that your families during this time also maybe also gain an appreciation for what you go through as a student?
That's a great question. I feel like my parents really never, even today, I don't think they realize the amount of time that you spend being a student, or the time commitment that it takes, especially here at UCLA, which is such a good and hard school, right? Because I feel like maybe when they went to school back in the day, it was a little bit easier, and they had to work at the same time when they were in university. Both of my parents did so. Since their very first day at university, they were already working. So I feel like they think that, or they see university as being something part-time, which is not accurate. At least in my experience, it's not accurate, because some days I just spend more than I would spend in a normal work doing classes or doing homework or doing projects. And this is something that they have to get used to. And I feel like by the end of the pandemic, they were realizing that some things from school just took a long time, and I had to be locked in my room from 8 to 6 some days, because I need a good grade. I'm here to get a good grade, and that's what they expect from me. So if they expect that from me, I'm gonna need this 8 hours to study or to do work or to go to club meetings, because clubs are a big thing here at UCLA too, and you're expected to be involved in those clubs. So really, I feel like it was a shock for them to see how long and how much effort it takes to be a university, but they're little by little, they are starting to get used to the idea.
Well, I've got a couple of questions from a bit different perspective, and we'll probably come back to the school and stuff soon. But over this past year, a lot certainly has gone on in the U.S. and a lot of our alumni are really curious about, as we reflect on this last year, what's the perception that you've had in terms of watching the news or watching what's gone on in this country over the last year? Pedro, I'm going to ask you to start. I know that's a broad range of topic, but I'll let you go at it from whichever way you would like.
I think starting here from the perspective that Brazil and the rest of the world has about the United States. Maybe some people living in the United States do not realize the importance that it has to the economy and the rest of the world in general. Everyone sees, like, for example, the developments in vaccines, how the economy is going, how all the situation is going in the US, and lots of people tend to use that to justify also actions in their home country, because US tends to be a power of reference. So putting that into perspective here in Brazil, I think Brazil had some close problems. If we think creating a parallel between United States and Brazil, we have both a high rate of infections and also deaths, and both challenges that we were facing were somewhat similar. So I think in lots of things, Brazil ended up being inspired also in the US. And lots of actions here, like I said, were justified also because of that international scenario. But right now, I think, especially after that, during this period, the United States has been seen with some good eyes there. They ended up solving the vaccination there in the United States a lot better than here. So I think the progression on that is a lot better. So in terms of general overview of the United States from like a foreigner here, it's general very good eyes still. Like everyone knows that is a very challenging situation, but the United States ended up solving it somewhat well there, at least faster than here, for example, in other countries as well.
Thank you for sharing your perspective on that. Yeah, Veronica, I'm going to go to you next, because you also mentioned some of the political challenges in your country when we first started. So what's your perspective on that and the balance of the perspective of the U.S. from your country in addition to what's been going on there?
Yeah, I think for a long time in Colombia, the perception of the U.S. is that things are better in the U.S. than in Colombia, which um, for a lot of reasons is true, but for a lot of other reasons, I think 2020 and the COVID pandemic showed that it maybe wasn't true. I think that there were a lot of things that happened over the summer here in the US that were a little bit hard to believe. And thinking of particularly during the summer, the Black Lives Matter protests, which initiated with the death of George Floyd. Um, One of the most amazing things that I've seen is how that protest sort of escalated internationally. In Colombia, there were so many protests, and it began a conversation about how race is treated in Latin America, in Colombia, which was also
But
very.
just so the incidents in the United States sparked similar protests in Colombia, you're saying?
Yes, 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 yes. And similar movements with, you know, you could see in the streets of Bogota, just people holding up George Floyd's image, which is insane to think about. But also images of young Black men and women from Colombia who had also been subject to police brutality.
Mhm.
And I think it really for me it was very interesting to see how these structural challenges were felt across the whole entire world, because that was something that was happening everywhere. But yeah, I think there was a lot of cracks in the idealization of the US, you know, with the political challenges that the US had in the fall. For example, one thing that Colombia never did, which I was very astonished by, and I think people back home were very astonished by, was the politicization of the mask. You know,
Thank you for bringing that up.
yeah, of wearing a mask. In Colombia, it was never a political act. Um, you know, I think as Pietro mentioned earlier, in Colombia, people have to decide whether they want to eat or they want to stay at home. And that was a huge part of the challenge of quarantine. But it was never a thing of, I am not going to wear a mask because I don't believe in the virus. It was more, I need to go out and work for my family,
Mhm.
but I will do so with a mask on. um, it was, so that was a little bit hard to believe, I think.
Mhm. Yeah. Pietro, how about you? Anything you would like to add to this?
Yeah, I think it's now I'm going to speak a little bit of Argentina of when I was there. And I think one common issue that most of the countries during the pandemic faced is that they thought that once cases went down, it was okay to reopen. And everyone was faced with that same decision. And even I thought, yes, it's probably better to start reopening restaurants so the economy gets going and all of that. But of course, if you start reopening restaurants, if there's more people on the street, more people in closed spaces, there will be more cases. So what happened to me is that when I was in Argentina in December, Argentina was doing great in terms of the COVID pandemic. The borders were reopening. You could fly from, I think, all neighbor countries. You could fly inside Argentina, and things were looking really bright. But of course, that if you start reopening and people are not vaccinated, the cases are going to go back up again. And going back to what Pedro said about just looking at the US as some sort of like the path to follow or some sort of inspiration, a lot of countries in Latin America did that. So they thought that since the US was reopening, because what happened in the US happened a little bit slower in Argentina. So cases were really bad in the US, but then they got good during summer, and then they basically got worse again during winter. But in Argentina, it all took a little bit longer, maybe because the seasons are shifted, right? But in Argentina, they were looking at the US as everything was reopening, and they thought it was okay to do so, but it wasn't, of course. So cases started getting really bad by the end of the year. And then beginning in January, again, I left in one of the last flights from Argentina to the US. Again, I was lucky just because everything was the cases were going up again. And in the US, it's actually always inverted for me. I think whenever Brazilian or Argentinian cases were going up, in the US, things were coming down. So I feel like we're just like following the US, but with a month or 2 month difference.
I can appreciate that. To answer some of the questions that have come in about UCLA and our reopening, you're starting to see things slowly open up. I think, Veronica, was it you that mentioned coming to some of the designated places on campus? The campus still officially is closed. So even if you were to come to Westwood, that most of the buildings are locked. Anything that's happening is happening outdoor. Some of our outdoor recreation spaces have started to open up, but you need to have a reservation to use them. And in terms of the fall, I just really, really hope that we can welcome our students back in the fall. And we'll be welcoming, this year's class, plus still some from last year that haven't been on campus yet. And there'll still be, from everything we're reading, while most students will be back, there'll still be some hybrid. A lot of that is dictated really by the county, because the county determines, for example, how many people can be gathered in a space. And so, that gets to class size. And so it's still, figuring out where are the spaces, which classes will be in person, which classes will be remote. And one of the best things I can recommend for you to do is the UCLA COVID-19 website. It's really a really great resource, and it's updated several times a day, including our return to work, our return to campus, and what are the spaces and the policies around, class size and where people can gather. So that again is updated really on a daily basis. So, but it does feel good to start to see things open up just a little bit more. And I certainly feel that, in Westwood. And when I'm on campus, one of the things that I so enjoy seeing is still every once in a while you see our students, and Pietro, hopefully this will be you at some point, taking their pictures in the graduation gear at the Bruin Bear. So you can close us down, but our traditions live on, right? And we did for commencement this year, while there's no commencement in person, we are creating spaces for celebration. So, hopefully we'll be back next year, and we have promised our previous year's classes that we will create that opportunity for them as well. So as much as possible, and I think about this a lot, and I'm sure you all do too, is we talk about returning to normal, but will it ever be that? I think the space that we find and we create will be something new. And that's something certainly that we'll move forward in doing together as Bruins do. So one question I have for you that's come through as well is, as you think about this last year and the experiences, and we haven't even, I know, touched the surface in terms of everything you all have experienced in this year, but what has continued to give you hope? I'll give you a moment to think on that. Over this past year, what has continued to give you hope? Anybody want to jump in?
Okay, can start here.
Okay.
I think one thing that I look very with good eyes there is that I think we proved that in a very short period of time we were able to develop a vaccine in this case. For me, that was outstanding given the past history of humanity. We see that the development of all the science community, medical community of the entire world just coming together to solve this very hard and challenging problem affecting the entire world, and be able to come up with that and sure that such a short amount of time is outstanding. I think that instance makes us more prepared to the future, because unfortunately I do not believe that will be the last disease pandemic that we'll have to fight, because throughout the history we have to face several other challenges like that. But I believe now we'll be more prepared.
I think adding to that is, and not really all in regards to the pandemic, but just seeing the unity that all of this adverse circumstances really brings to just society and humanity as a whole is just really impressive. Some of the examples of that is just the George Floyd protests. I could see the same commotion, or maybe not the same, but a similar commotion that was happening in the US all over the world. And my friends from international schools that I've studied in my life, or even at UCLA, they were all sharing the same message, which is police brutality is not good and everyone is the same. And another example of that is there was also a moment during last year where Amazonas, one of the states in Brazil, didn't have enough supply of oxygen. And it was just so impressive to see literally everyone sharing the same message that these people need help. Just trying to serve as a bridge between the people who need help and the people who can provide that help. And we can see the same thing happen today in India with all that's going on there, how people are sharing this in social media. And you can see that people are really united against this common cause.
Yeah, I think along that same line, I think the COVID pandemic for me has been a moment where I've been very aware of acts of kindness that I see people do. And, if we talk about in bigger context, the kindness of for example, what Pietro was talking about, the solidarity or compassion you feel for groups that are, um, that have all of these structural problems going on, but also kindness that I've faced in, like, for example, my classes. I don't know. I think I've been very lucky to have really good professors that have extended deadlines or that have been very responsive to students having issues or students having emotional responses to everything that has been going on. I have seen acts of kindness from my friends who have been there for me in like really hard times, from my family. And so yeah, I think I've become more aware of how kind we can be to each other, and how like kindness sort of like lifts each other up. And I think it's been a great moment for that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Veronica. There's one question, totally switching gears again on you, that's come in. I just want to see if we can get at least one answer in. Jennifer's asking about experiences for folks that are elderly. Uh, does anybody have any comments on whether it was difficult for older folks to accept the guidelines for the pandemic in your countries? Anybody want to comment on that?
Sure, I can talk about it. So for older people in Colombia, it was pretty much, if lockdown was strict for all of us, which it was, as I mentioned before, it was very, very, very restricted. For older people, it was even more restricted. In Colombia, in Bogota, where I was, for example, we could leave, as I mentioned before, to take out your dog for 20 minutes a day, or to get any sort of essential groceries on um, a system where you would have to go on a specific day according to your ID number. So yeah, restricted mobility. And then for older people, it was even worse. They could not leave their house whatsoever. So for example, I have two older grandmas living in Colombia right now, and they could not leave the house whatsoever. They could not do their own groceries. They could not go to the bank. So it was very hard, but also it was for their safety and protection. In Colombia, for example, the vaccine rollout has been for as for ages. I know in California that's a little bit different, but in Colombia we have done it with specific age groups. So, for example, first, I think it was 80 and above, and now we're down to 60. So I think slowly, elderly people are coming back to some sort of normalcy.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. It's also moments like that that we need to return to your previous answer around the importance of kindness. So we've come to the end, and I knew that hour would go by fast, and there's so many things that we didn't have a chance to talk about yet. So we may have to invite you all back for an all-star panel down the road. But I want to thank each of you for sharing your experiences and being so open and in moments vulnerable with us. Really appreciate that. And to all of our Bruins who are watching, thank you so much for spending some time with us and hearing the stories of our alumni and students from South America. And we'll keep doing this. I think it's just been so valuable to hear what the experience has been for our alumni around the country. So in the meantime, we hope you stay safe, you stay healthy, and as always, remain Bruin strong. Thank you so much.